I want to start this morning by thanking those of you who have been exhibiting a special ministry to me, and that is the ministry of coughing. I'm beginning to wonder maybe there is a spiritual gift of coughing or something, I don't know, something. But I can remember all week asking myself, am I going to get through this thing? See, Monday I almost called Andrew, but I had two questions in my mind. First of all, is my mind clear enough to finish the sermon and get up and preach? But then that's always a question, right? And then, will I be able to get through without coughing? And at that time, I felt like I was doing better. So every time you cough, that movie where every time the bell rings, an angel gets his wings or something like that? So every time you cough, I get my wings, or I don't know, something like that. Anyhow, this morning as I was pulling into the parking lot, my phone dinged, and I had a moment to look at it, and it was from the Social Security Administration warning me about Social Security scams. Now, I didn't have a chance to check on it and see if it's a scam or not, okay? So I closed it up, and I'll look at it later. But I have a friend who recently got a message from Microsoft saying that he needed to update his email or else they were going to cut off his account. So he, not thinking, clicked, did some updating, and only later did it occur to him that he did not have an email account with Microsoft. We all have our moments of weakness, but all of his friends, everybody on his email list suddenly started getting stuff. That's how I knew about this, you see. We get messages we don't want. Now, I want to ask you, this morning, if you pick up your phone, I'm sure you want us to think you're checking your Bible app, but if you're checking your messages and you get a message from God, it says from God saying, I have something I want you to do, you might want to be a little suspicious. But then again, God does talk to people. He speaks to people. Just go back in your Bible. Did Noah have an iPhone? Then how in the world did he know to build an ark, let alone the dimensions and what to make it up and stuff like that? God spoke to him, right? Did Abram have a Facebook account? How did God tell him to leave home and move out of a beautiful civilized city out into a wasteland called Canaan? How did he know this? Joseph and Mary somehow got the message without Twitter that Herod was after them. Get out. So they ran, okay? Then you go down to the Apostle Paul, happily on his way to Damascus, ready to do some serious business with those Jesus people. Yeah. Until Jesus himself met him on the road, knocked him down, made him blind, and said, listen to me, boy, okay? Sometimes God has to go to real extremes to speak to us. Now, this morning, if you get a message on your phone from God saying that he wants you to join a special committee to reorder the Bible, because after all, these are modern times, and we need to take it and kind of put it in an order where people can read it. And the first assignment you have is to pick how are you going to start the Bible? What's the first verse you're going to put in it? Now, if you get that email and you believe it, I would either keep it to yourself or get prepared to be locked in the closet over here, okay? But besides, but if you did, let's just pretend that you did. What would you pick as the first verse in the Bible? John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Ephesians 2:8, for we are saved by grace through faith. Maybe the 23rd Psalm. I know good and well that this generation, a lot of them would pick Matthew 7:1, which, if my memory serves me correctly, says, judge not. But what did God say? If you don't know it by now, and if you haven't memorized it, and you don't know what's there, turn to Genesis 1:1 with me for a moment. Genesis 1:1. God chose to start the Bible with this verse. And again, I'm sure most of you know it by this time, but Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What an awesome thought to begin at the beginning with the beginning, right? Okay, Now, did Moses come up with that line? We don't know. We believe that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Jesus quotes them and things like that. There are reasons why we believe that. But we don't know how Moses came up with some of these things. Did God dictate it to him, and he wrote it down? Did it appear to him in a dream? Was it just a pet phrase? We don't know. But Moses wrote this, and he said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, that verse is there for a reason. It's not just casually stuck in there because, we got to have something to begin with. We need some kind of a filler, whatever it is. It is laying a basic foundation for who we are as Christians, for who we are as a people. Foundations are important. If I'd wandered in here when they had the trenches dug here, I have enough experience in construction that I probably could have walked around here and said, yep, going to be a bathroom over here. Yeah, they're going to put a kitchen here. This is an awful big hole. I think maybe they're going to have a second story here. You know, you could look at things and tell what the building is going to be like based on the foundation. And we as Christians need to understand what our foundation is, where it all starts, where all this starts fitting together so we can build properly and know what we're supposed to be doing. These are the big questions of life. Where does life come from? What is the purpose of life? And he starts here with this basic statement that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, you are going to become a reporter. We're going to become reporters. Now, I say that in a positive way. I know how, you know. But most of you may have taken a class in writing or something in English where they talk to you about when you write something, you have the 6 questions. You know, I got to count them off so I get them all. Who, how, why, what, where, and when. Got them right, okay? 6 questions. Now, you notice from the title, we're only going to cover 3 of those today, okay? Sorry. But we're going to look at 3 of these things about who this is. We're going to go look at this, and we're going to start where God starts, in the beginning. In the beginning. That's a powerful statement of faith. It is not stuck in there as filler. It's not just kind of a, you know, the warm-up comedian to get you ready for the real act. You know, that's not what it is. This is a statement. God starts off with his big guns. And we need to understand that and realize that. Now, I am going to put my Bible away at this point because until I get further on and we refer to Romans and stuff like that, I know this verse by heart. I don't need to keep repeating it, okay? I'm not going to put it away. I'm just going to put it up there. But, it's there for a reason, and it shapes us. Now, it is there, and it sounds so simple. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It sounds so basic, and it's so simple that we forget how deep that really is. You live in a world that rejects that concept. You understand that? I mean, you're a basket case for believing that. If you actually believe it, but it's incredibly profound. And what we don't seem to understand at this point is it's also a very scientifically solid statement. Now, a lot of us don't keep up on this kind of stuff, and we didn't know we were right, how right we were. We've been saying this for 3,500 years. Well, the Jews started, okay? We didn't come along till later. But this has been in the Bible for 3,500 years, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And for 3,500 years, secular scientists have been laughing at us. Oh, you silly children. Come on, how can you believe something like that? You know, they were convinced that we were fools. And that's okay. I don't mind them thinking we're fools. My children felt the same way about me, you know? And I'm sure your children don't feel that way or never have and that kind of thing. Or if you're children, I'm sure you never feel that way, okay? But it's a stage they go through, stage of ignorance, and eventually, hopefully, they come to a different position and think you actually do know something. But there is a bigger problem than them being convinced that we are fools. What the world has managed to do is convince us that we're fools. We've bought their line. What do you mean God created it in the beginning? Come on, we know that doesn't happen. What kind of an uneducated person are you? You've heard the term blind faith. Christians don't use that phrase generally. We use reasoned faith, thoughtful faith, Bible-supported faith. We have a lot of things, but we don't generally talk about blind faith unless there's that rare case where it actually has the only thing we can do, or God in the box. You know, they've got all these different terms they use to try and put us down and make us think that we are insignificant. And we become like parents sometimes and listen to our children. Have you ever met parents who listen to what their children tell them and actually think they know what they're talking about? You know, I've met people like that, and it's awesome. Scary, too. The accepted wisdom of the scientific community for centuries was that the universe was eternal. Didn't have a beginning, didn't have an end. It's always been here, and it always will be here. And they said the Bible was foolishness. And then we have 2 different dates I'm going to share with you. One is 1912 and one is 1960. You see, they only laughed at us for about 3,440 years. Because in 1960, something happened that made all the chuckles stop. You know how a broken clock is right twice a day? Well, even scientists will get right every once in a while, okay? And they were forced into this occasion where, you see, there have been a few scientists who've been out doing their work of science, real science, biblical science. Well, they didn't call it that, but science based on reality and honesty and truth and looking for answers. And they kept digging, and they kept finding new instruments to measure with and new equations that were, and they started seeing that it's not working. They're looking for answers. It's not working. And they found that their answers that they'd been relying on and laughing at us about for 3,000 years were not fitting their paradigm anymore. And it got so bad, they got uncomfortable enough that they had to change. Now, as you know, they probably did not admit that they were wrong. It doesn't happen that way. But they learned that there was more than they had admitted to, that the earth was not eternal, that the universe was not eternal, that it had not always been here. Now, they didn't go out right away and start quoting Genesis 1:1. I mean, you didn't go to a science conference and say, well, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That never happened, okay? And they didn't, they just didn't do that. They didn't suddenly say, oh, the Bible was right all along, okay? And keep in mind, 1960 is when this change came about. That was before most of you were in school. So you were raised perhaps with this new idea that came along, and they didn't tell you about where they've been for 2,000, 3,000 years before that, okay? They like to keep that in the closet so that you don't have to know it. They did what science always did. They came up with a new theory. And that's okay, because that's good science. What science is supposed to do is when they find something doesn't work, they dig a little deeper, they look a little harder. That's the way it's supposed to work, and they forget that. But they came up with this new theory, and you know the name of the theory. It's called the Big Bang Theory. And I hate to tell you this, but it was not named after the TV show, okay? It was there before the TV show, before TV even. But they came up with this idea of the Big Bang Theory. And the idea itself had been around since 1912. So this idea is floating around for 50 years, being rejected, being said, no, that can't be it, that can't be it, that can't be it, that can't, they're just time and time again. We're not even going to go there. It's fascinating listening to some of these guys when they're trying to make a defense. And they're not even going to go there, which is the only obvious place to go, but they're not going to go there. Until finally they couldn't put it off anymore. Now, why did they put it off? Why did they keep saying, no, 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 no? Now, I'm going to give you a quote here, and this is from that extremely reputable source called Wikipedia, right? So, take it with a grain of salt, whatever. I think they probably haven't gotten to editing this one yet. But here's what it said in Wikipedia. In the 1920s and 1930s, almost every major cosmetologist, now, that's not the one that does your hair, okay? This is somebody that studies the cosmos, okay? Not every major hairdresser. Every major scientist who studied the universe, okay? Preferred an eternal steady state universe, meaning it's always been here, it's always been like this, it's never going to change, it's always going to be, in other words, the universe is God. And several complained that the beginning of time implied by the Big Bang imported religious concepts into physics. This objection was later repeated by supporters of the steady state theory. So they did not reject it based on scientific evidence, based on equations, based on measurements. They rejected it because they hate God. That's what it comes down to. And eventually they had to change their feelings, but they couldn't change their hatred. Many scientists still have this inner hatred of God. Follow the science, they say. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. I don't know if you have ever gone out and tried to follow a toddler through IKEA. There are beds to bounce on, chest of drawers to climb, closets to look into, things to move, all kinds of things to keep you from actually getting to wherever it is you're going. And then suddenly they need the bathroom and you don't know where we are. There's all this have you ever tried to look at the drawings of a 3-year-old? I have a 3-year-old grandson, and he loves to draw. And we're afraid he's somewhat colorblind. Now, when you're drawing at 3 years old, you may know what you're drawing, but what is the rest of the world has no clue what's going on there. It's kind of like that. There's a difference between following science and following the Bible. And the difference is, there's a big difference, and it's built in. It's not necessarily evil, but it's one that you need to understand. Now, if you went home and went into your study and pulled out your original copy of the King James Bible of 1611, which I'm sure you all have on your shelf there, right? And you pulled that out and you opened it up somewhere in the middle and looked at it and you say, what is this? There's a good chance you couldn't read a word because the language has changed, vocabulary has changed, spelling has changed, all this. Now, if you went and pulled that off the shelf and turned it to Genesis 1:1, guess what it would say? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, a slight difference, the word heaven instead of a V has a U, but that's just one of those things, the typographical things that has changed over time. It says exactly the same thing today that it said back then. And the reason for that is that basic truth does not change. And the Bible is based on basic truth. There are things there that will never change. Now, yes, I know we have different denominations and all that stuff, but some things just do not change. Now, if you went back to 1611 and went down to Oxford or wherever they had scholars and asked for a science textbook, they'd look at you funny saying, what is science? Because in those days, scientists were not called science, they were called natural philosophers. So you would want a book on natural philosophy, okay? And as you went down through the years, you would find out that that book is constantly changing. The details, the facts, everything is changing. And that is one of the basic differences. Science is based on investigating errors. You see, real science keeps going out, doing experiments, finding what works, what doesn't work, and going on to the next level, and they keep looking because they think someday they're going to come across the truth. And they keep adding new theories and all that. But keep in mind, in 1611, Newton hadn't even come up with the theory of gravity yet. And if my reading was correct, you didn't have a Celsius or a Fahrenheit scale for thermometers. There are just all kinds of things that have been developing as we go on that are changing all of this. And that's what science is based on. The Bible, on the other hand, is based on understanding truth, and truth that is relatively clear. Science should be based on the search for truth, but that's not how they look at it. Like, for instance, one of the things I taught science in the middle school level. I was going to bring my credential to prove to you that, I'm qualified, The original credential I had said that I was qualified to teach life science and general science from kindergarten through 12th grade and even adult classes. Sounds impressive, right? In other words, I could go out and teach 12th grade molecular biology or something like that, and I was supposedly qualified for it. Okay, if they say so, I'll take the check, But when I started teaching science, all I could do was keep ahead one chapter ahead of the kids, okay? But we worked it out because there's not that much in basic science that anybody can't teach, okay? So we did that, and one of the things I came across was different theories that have developed over the years about the age of the Earth. Okay, well, it started off, evidently, at one point they had this idea of the rate of cooling. And some bright scholars said, well, we know that when the Big Bang happened, that the temperature was such and such. And then we know it took so many million, billions, whatever years to cool down to the place where the solar system started forming. And we knew what that temperature was. And they followed this process down and measured the Earth, and they said, well, the Earth is between 20 and 40 million years old based on the rate of cooling. Good, solid evidence, right? Until some genius happened to find out that the center of the Earth has radioactive material in it, which generates heat. So much for that theory, okay? Then we went on. The next theory I came up with was the thickness of the sediment. You know how, the Mississippi River washes all this stuff out into the ocean, and you have these different rock sediments. And they said, we can figure this out. We can look and see how thick is the rock, we can measure it, and we can tell how old the Earth is. And they come up with that one, they came up with 75 million years, okay? Then some bright student decided they would dig somewhere else and found out that the differences were so dramatic that it didn't really tell you anything, all right? Next theory that came up was how salty are the oceans? Okay, when it rains, it washes minerals out of the water into the rivers down to the ocean, right? And if you start with the idea that the water was pristine at the beginning, and you're able to measure how much salt is in there, and you know how quickly it flows down, you can measure how old the Earth is, right? Now, these people came up with 75 million years. No, wait, no, 90 million years. But they also had a problem with that because some brilliant student who wanted to write a PhD went out and measured a different ocean and found out that the salt content in different oceans was too significant for them to allow to be used this theory any longer, okay? The next one was radioactive decay. Now, this is the last one I got to because I quit teaching 20 years ago. I don't know what theories they've come up with since then, okay? But radioactive decay, they came up with 4.5 billion years old. I don't know what the current number is. Whatever it is, okay? Now, always changing. Now, I want you to compare that journey with the journey of the Bethel Methodist Church. Now, let's see. If I remember correctly, dedicated the third general conference in 1991, so 1987, does that sound about right? For when Bethel Methodist Church started? Sound good? It's good enough. Now, back in 1987, did a group of dedicated elders and laymen in the Bethel Methodist group go out and start a new church and say, you know what? We need to come up with a new plan of salvation. This bloody Jesus stuff has got to go. Let's come up with, if we feel good about each other, or if we accept everybody, you know, if we do that, let's come up with that. Let's do that. Let's get rid of this nonsense about holiness and about living spiritual life. Let's get rid. Oh, and this has got to go too. You know, you got to get something different. Is that what they did? No. They went out and they looked back into the historic theology and doctrines of the church. And they examined the Word of God, which hasn't changed. And they went into all this, and lo and behold, they actually went back and looked at what the Methodists used to teach. So they didn't come up with something brand new. They basically went back to what was already there. My kids got me a Kindle years ago. I fell in love with Kindle. You can download a site called Project Gutenberg Project. You can download all kinds of free stuff. And in the investigating, I found out that there was this whole series of books on sermons through the ages type thing. And I said, okay, I've got some free time. I'll start reading. And I went back and I downloaded this sermon by a guy named John Chrysostom. Okay, John Chrysostom was born in the year 347, and I read his sermon. What's that? 1,500, 1,600, 1,700 years ago, translated out of a foreign language, and it read like it was written yesterday. The lifting up Jesus, the process of salvation, all of these glorious things that are so vital to our faith were the same 1,700 years ago. You can't say that about anything having to do with science, because science is this, got to find something new, whereas we have to find what the truth is. Now, some of the other sermons were rather boring, because that's just style, but there was this consistent basic being the same. And we need to learn how to work with science and where to fit us in. Back to the Big Bang. As I was trying to study this and understand it, there's something called a singularity. You probably heard that term. A singularity, the teaching they came up with is that there was this dot where everything in the universe was taken and squeezed down into this little microscopic little dot that you couldn't even see. Now picture, go out at night, on a clear night, look out, see the Milky Way, see the galaxies, see the stars, see all of that was squeezed down into this little microscopic thing that you couldn't find if you dropped it on the floor, okay? All the energy, all the material, everything was squeezed into that. Picture, have you ever tried to get a big pillow into a small pillowcase? Try forcing the entire universe into a little tiny dot, okay? And I don't know how long this is supposed to have been there, but it's called a singularity because there's only one of them, okay? There was no time, there was no matter, and there was nothing outside that singularity, according to them. And when they say nothing, they don't mean empty space, they mean nothing. That was it. And they don't say that I know of how long it existed, but suddenly there was this Big Bang. And in a microsecond, all of that mass spread out over 10 million light years across the universe and is still expanding, okay? Now, I don't know how much you know about physics, but for a material to move 10 million light years in a microsecond defies everything we believe in or know about. So here these scientists are coming up with an impossibility that fits perfectly into our statements. And they're saying that all of this got spread all the way across here, defying all the laws of nature. Since we know nature's God, that fits in fine, no problem. If you want to do it that way, that's good. And these same people that believe that happened will laugh at you as a fool if you say that God created the earth in 7 days. Whether you accept that or not. I mean, you see the disconnect here between what they want to believe and what they don't. So here we have this singularity going out, and all these things are happening. Let them know. If someone comes to you and starts talking about the Big Bang as if it's some new insight that you as a Christian and your Bible can't really believe, just kind of smile and nod. And if you get a chance, you might welcome them to the party, which they've been missing for 3,500 years. Okay? Welcome to my world where in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. I mean, we have nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to hold our heads down for, nothing to think they've got the final word. So that's the first part about when. Now, what about the second part? Now, see, here's where it really gets dicey. This is where we come down to the real division between science on one hand and Christianity on the other. And that's that second thing. In the beginning, God. Whoa! Let's not go there. We can't deal with that. If science had trouble with the beginning, the next part is worse for them. You see, God keeps staring them in the face. God keeps looking at them, and he's the only explanation. And he's not saying, don't keep looking for new answers, don't keep researching, but he's saying, don't leave me out of the equation because I'm the one that's making this happen in the first place. They stare him and they ignore it. They deny the source of the beginning. And it is a real problem for them. I'm going to throw another term at you. It's the principle of science and philosophy called universal causation. Whoa. And what that basically means is if the cookies are missing from the cookie jar, somebody took them. Okay? There is a cause for everything. If something happened, something caused it. And they don't like that because the next question is, what caused the Big Bang? If you've got this stable singularity existing for who knows how long, and you can't know how long because there's no time, okay? And it's there, and suddenly that changes it. What made that happen? I was out blowing bubbles with the kids yesterday, and those bubbles would just float along. One of them got all the way across the driveway, over into the next forest, and even disappeared in the trees. But you know what? Eventually it touched something and popped. There are reactions that happen. They're real, and they don't want to believe it. Now turn to Romans chapter 4, verse 17, will you? Romans 4:17, I want to look at that a second. That kind of backs up what we're talking about. You see, they agree with the Bible, but they don't know it. And of course, they don't want to admit it because they want to leave out that key thing. And they believe you don't get something from nothing, and we believe that too. But Romans chapter 4, verse 17, Paul is writing and he says this, as it is written, a father of many nations have I made you in the sight of him whom he believed, even God who gives life to the dead and calls into being that which does not exist. Now the Bible tells us God did this. Science tells us he can't. It can't have happened, but it did happen. That's true, but it can't have happened, And they kind of get into this circular thing. And I was listening to one guy, he's some kind of a chemist, whatever. And he says, when you ask these scientists certain questions that they can't answer, he says, they don't answer you. What they do is they just ignore you. He says, you ask them these things, and you point out their statistics and their data, and you say, how can this be? And they just, literally, they just look the other way and ignore them. They don't go there. They can't answer it because science admits it happened, but it couldn't have happened. You see the problem here? The Big Bang Theory, very real, and science is still in denial. What caused the Big Bang? They don't know. We do. And we knew it had a beginning. They didn't know it. We did. We know, and maybe someday they'll find out. So we've got time, we've got a who, then there's the question of what is the problem here? And we need to understand what the disagreement is between us and the secular world. It is not a competition between the book of Genesis and the origin of species. It's not a competition between science and the Bible. It's not a disagreement between creation and evolution even. What it comes down to is a belief in whether the universe is something created by a God who had a purpose or whether it is just an accident. So the question is God or chance, and that's what it's all about. Understand the Bible is not a scientific textbook. It's not. It has scientific facts in it, but it's not a scientific textbook. This is a science book. I've checked it out twice now. I'm about halfway through. It's pretty heavy stuff. This is a Christian biologist who is going into evolution and creation, all that, and he's going down into almost the molecular level of the cell, okay? And this book represents one tiny, 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 tiny little part of what science is looking into. And it's probably out of date now, and it's only a couple years old, right? A tiny part of science and the truth of the universe. It's not a science textbook. It's not a math textbook. If you wanted to figure out, say you want new carpet, and you had to figure out how much new carpet to get for the sanctuary here, the Bible's not going to tell you how to figure that out. It's just not. Or let's say you're going to have a big potluck, or you're going to fix a chili fry or whatever, chili, you're going to do something here. And you got to increase by 25%. You got to increase all of your recipes by 25%. I hate to tell you this, but I don't think the Bible's going to tell you how to do that. Okay? It's not a math textbook. And this may come as a shock. It's also not a history textbook. It has history in it, yes. And what's always amazing is how these archaeologists and experts keep finding things that the Bible's been saying all along and finding out the Bible was right after they've been saying it's wrong. Did you know that now someone is saying that King David actually existed because they found proof? Excuse me? It's this kind of mindset. Anyhow, this is a book called August of 1914. I haven't read it yet, but in looking through it, it looks to me like it covers maybe a couple months of the beginning of World War I. This is a book that covers 3,000 or 4,000 years of history. Somehow I think there's some things that are left out. It's not a history textbook. It is a book that gives us all the basics of what we really need for eternity, for becoming children of God, for living righteous lives. It's all there. Now, there are certain things the Bible will never give you. It can't help you determine the speed of light. It can't help you decide, well, it might help you some, but it's never going to tell you who to marry. It's just not there. Not going to give you any stock advice, It's not there. But there are other things that you won't find without it, such as meaning in life, moral values, and Jesus. The things that you need to survive for an eternity, you'll find in here. You probably won't even find a clue in here. Because that's what this book is all about. That's what the confidence that we have. When you go out that door, I don't know if you thought about it when you came in. I did because I knew I was going to say this. Which way does the door swing? Don't look. Don't look. Does it swing out or does it swing in? Now, I know some of you in construction know which way it goes because there are codes on this kind of thing. But most people don't think about which way the door swings. Have you ever watched somebody go up and go, because it goes the other way, right? Now, having known that, when you go out, will you expect it to swing the same way? Why? What gives you the confidence to know that an hour or two later, that door is going to work exactly the way it did when you came in? It's because you are used to living in a universe created by a God who is consistent and trustworthy and reliable. You, in your heart, you don't believe you live in a world of chance, because that door might suddenly decide, I think I'll open the other way today. It doesn't work that way. Or say you go out to your car, and you're talking to your friends, and you pull out your keys, and you get your keys, and you go to stick them in the door, and it doesn't go. So you have to pay attention. Oh, wrong key. Or got it in the wrong direction if you got an old key, things like that. Now, when you put it in, you expect it to go in, and you expect it to turn. And in a universe created by a trustworthy, eternal God, where everything is in its place, you can count on that. But in a world of survival of the fittest, selection, maybe those little springs in that door might just decide by chance that they're going to change their molecular structure, and no longer are they going to be springs, but they're going to become rods. Your key's not going to go in, it's not going to turn. But that's what you get when you live in a world of chance, of evolution, of guesswork, because you never know when the end is going to come. I haven't got time to go into all that, but generally speaking, we function in a world designed to be trusted. If you drop a glass of water, does gravity stop for a moment and say, I wonder which way we're going to go today? Now, it may look like it when it hits the floor and goes all over the place, but there are certain physical laws. It doesn't end up on the ceiling necessarily, okay? There are certain things. When Jean goes over in a few minutes and starts playing that last hymn, when she puts her fingers down on those chords, it's going to sound a certain way because those strings didn't suddenly decide, I feel like a B flat instead of a C today, just don't I look like a B flat? There's all kinds of things. There's just, it's kind of a B flat type of day. All that kind of, we live in a world where we trust God because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. When you go out that door, you're going to run into a society that rejects that idea. They think they're free to do anything they want and there are going to be no consequences. People who think that you are the Neanderthal in the group, even though I'm not sure they've ever proved that Neanderthals ever existed, but whatever, you are the Neanderthal, and they will look down on you. At best, they'll think you're naive. At worst, they'll think you're stupid. But deep down inside, it's a little different. Their answers are not working for them, and they know they're wrong. How many of you remember a poem called Richard Cory? Any of you? I heard this in high school, and it just bore into my gut. Richard Cory. Let me read it to you. I'm not a big poetry fan, but I'll do the best I can, okay? Whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown, clean-favored and imperially slim. And he was always quietly arrayed, and he was always human when he talked. But still, he fluttered pulses when he said, "Good morning," and he glittered when he walked. And he was rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought that he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. And so we worked and waited for the light, and went without meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. Didn't see it coming, did you? That's where the world is at. There is a quiet desperation. They're not maybe going to share it with you. There's a futility where there is no real purpose, no real anywhere to go. That's the world you live in. Your neighbor has been told that they are nothing but an accident of nature. They've been told that all kinds of lies, and you know better. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, one more place I want you to look is Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 17. See, we have the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But the joy we have is that it doesn't stop there. Did somebody take Colossians out of my Bible? There it is. Got it. Okay, good. Colossians chapter 1, starting in verse 15. Now, you'll see some resemblance here to Genesis 1:1, but it goes a step further. I'm in Philippians. That doesn't work. Now, the encouraging thing about that is, when I started trying to read it, I knew it was wrong. Oh, yes. It's sad when you start reading and don't know it's the wrong verse. But anyhow. Verse 15. And he, speaking of Jesus, is the image of the invisible God and the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, and all things have been created by him and for him. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, right? And then this verse 17. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Wow. We're coughing. We're struggling. We got all kinds of things going on. But you know what? Jesus is in there working on that stuff. Your chair holds you up. Why? Because Jesus is there making sure that it doesn't collapse on you. Everything, everywhere, all around us is in the hands of the same God who in the beginning created, is now still maintaining and moving things forward. So work on your attitude. Be courteous. Don't go out there thinking, I got the answers, because you don't. But God does. But work on it. Be courteous and be kind. And when you run into these people, think of them as if they're toddlers wanting to have a serious discussion about unicorns. My 4-year-old granddaughter loves unicorns. And I can get into, I don't know how long discussion, do they have wings? Do they have to have wings? What color do they come in? All these kinds of things. Where do the rainbows come from? Those kinds of things. There's all kinds of stuff going on here. And I can't change their mind. But the hope is that eventually they will mature to the point where they can actually think and process and move on to bigger things. And when you go out to dinner with someone, when you have friends over, when you talk to coworkers, they may not be ready to say anything to you right now. But they live in a world of chance. And you live in a world of God. And in time, that difference should show up in such a way that someday they will look at you and say, how can you be in such a good mood knowing what's going on in the community around you? And oh, what an open door that'll give you. Well, because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What? Are you crazy? What's that got to do? And there's just all kinds of ways you can go with that depending on your personality and your opportunities, okay? Praise God. Let's finish with that. What number is it, Paul?